Episode 489. The hand grenade is a low-tier skill for the Grenadier class. While it does have area of effect damage, the actual damage value is extremely low. However, for clearing out groups of weak enemies, this low-tier skill is remarkably effective due to its very short cooldown. In the water, the grenade's blast effect was even more pronounced. The blast didn't just push characters outward in a ring, it shoved them in every direction, up, down, and all around. The surface of the water was blasted apart by the shockwave, sending spray in all directions. The players who had been about to surface from below were now disoriented, unable to find their bearings in the chaotic aftermath. Then came the sound of a splash and churning waves. A flash of cold steel followed. Yi Chu had used a quick recover as he entered the water, and Lord Grimm's movements were now completely under his control. The moment he hit the water, he drew his sword and unleashed a draw sword slash. The sword energy shot through the water, churning up a string of bubbles. The sword's speed was far slower than on land, but not a single other character could dodge it. Then Lord Grimm twisted around and thrust a palm downward. The knockback effect of his falling flower palm was weakened in the water, but by pushing the current, the attack's area of effect expanded dramatically. The force of that single palm strike sent at least 5 players reeling, their bodies lurching downward, dragged helplessly toward the riverbed. None of those who came to surround and kill Thousand City were weak. They were all elite members of major guilds. After personally experiencing or witnessing the battle between the group and Lord Grimm, they suddenly understood one thing. In the water, the gap between them and Lord Grimm had widened even further. Because water is a special environment, here, all stats and skill effects have to be re-evaluated. Even these elite players didn't have much experience in that regard. The game rarely has specific quests or dungeons that must be completed underwater. Even when it does, they're brief and involve fighting NPCs. Players can breeze through them once they've learned the routine. They had very little experience with this kind of completely improvised underwater combat. But Yi Chu was different. He was a pro player. They studied specific combat scenarios, water battles included. If there was water combat, then there were water maps in the Pro League. Some teams even specialized in it, choosing aquatic arenas to gain an edge. So any pro player has to have specialized training in underwater combat. At the very least, they can't be like regular players, trying to make judgments based on land-based vision while submerged. So compared to this pro god, they were basically a bunch of noobs. Just as they were gripped by panic, another muffled boom sounded. A massive wave of water crashed over them, dealing damage and sending them tumbling head over heels. They turned their gaze and saw wind-combing smoke and mist submerged beneath the water. The muzzle of the cannon that had just fired was now forming a swirling vortex, with currents of water spiraling all around it. It finally dawned on them. The ones who saw them as rookies weren't just one person, but 2.
What's the plan?
What's the plan?
Everyone already had their own read on the situation, yet they still had to run it by the higher-ups. For those in charge, this was undoubtedly the most agonizing moment. They were all experts, and they understood better than anyone just how dire the situation had become. They never expected their opponents to use their pro-gamer experience and advantages to fight them in a water battle. It's just plain bullying. The leaders of the major guilds all wore expressions of utter despair. They'd already lost 4 people. If they kept fighting, more would die. More importantly, even if they could gain the upper hand, their complete lack of experience meant the enemy could just disengage if the fight turned against them. Could they even stop them from escaping?
No confidence. No one has any confidence.
The guild leaders conferred in hushed tones, while the battle beneath the water raged on unabated. Everyone realized a terrifying truth. Lord Grimm had been the one attacking them all along. So what does that tell you? This shows they're completely unafraid. Perhaps that numerical advantage simply didn't register for someone like Yi Chu once they were underwater. The few players who tried to challenge the god of gaming ended up making a complete spectacle of themselves. The skills they unleashed were like they were firing blind. Lord Grim dodged it with what seemed like no effort at all. His counterattacks, however, were precise and relentless, hitting exactly where he aimed.
Get back! Get back!
Some people didn't wait for the guild leader's instructions and had already started offering suggestions. Quite a few people immediately took the cue and began to back away. It's not that these people didn't try. They did, but moving on water is just fundamentally different from moving on land. On land, your movement options are limited to the cardinal directions. Maybe you can jump into the air. But underwater, the options for movement are far greater. To truly surround a single character requires far more manpower and careful positioning. They were never any good at fighting in the water to begin with. Lord Grim had them completely stumped. He fought his way through the entire journey. Not a single player down there escaped unscathed. Suddenly, someone let out a cry of surprise. Then, everyone saw this player with a text bubble reading Aya floating above his head, charging desperately for the surface. But almost immediately, a shell exploded right above his head. The blast wave surged through the water, and instead of advancing, he was driven several feet deeper. He ignored the blast completely, steadied himself, and drove upward toward the surface. And this time, no one paid him any mind. But just as he was about to break the surface, his body suddenly seized up, then began to convulse in the water with a jerky, mechanical rhythm. The players froze for a moment, then it hit them. He's drowning. The guy ran out of oxygen, his life at its end. Those convulsions meant he was already a goner. It's just like a little death animation, letting you know what happened. Sure enough, the guy's twitching stopped after just a couple of jerks. The character hung motionless in the water. Moments later, a flash of white light signaled the player had chosen to respawn back in town. Now the kill team was down another member. That drowning served as a stark reminder. Half the remaining players went pale, their minds so preoccupied with other worries that they'd mostly forgotten to watch their own oxygen bars. Those who had noticed it simply assumed it was a basic thing everyone would remember, so they never thought to remind anyone else. The length of the oxygen bar is based on a character's stamina, so it varies from person to person. You can't really use your own to gauge someone else's. It wasn't until one of them had already drowned that half the group finally realized their colossal blunder. They raced for the surface like it was a competition, only now understanding their own oversight and that their opponent had been planning for it all along. Lord Grim's figure swiftly appeared around them, blasting, slapping, and grappling, doing everything he could to keep these players trapped underwater. If they could just tank the damage, they wouldn't hesitate. But Yeshu was using skills that created displacement. In the water, if you calculated the angle right, you could push someone straight down. A whole bunch of them were flailing and struggling, shouting frantically in the channel all the while, but the others were just as helpless to save them. When chasing down a single target, positioning and prediction are key. But here, underwater, they simply couldn't track Lord Grim's elusive serpentine movements.